Hello everybody, my name is Anthony and I'm currently a freshman studying computer science at Stanford University. In this lesson video, I will be going through reading and analyzing my own college application essay on the Common App and pointing out strategies in developing your own personal statement about yourself and your passions. So to preface this video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Common Application essay. This essay is by far the most important college essay you will be writing, because it is sent to almost all the colleges you're applying to through the Common Application. It can also be like shortened or revised to fit other prompts for colleges that don't use the Common Application. So therefore, this essay should be something that embodies who you are, the one thing that you want to show your admission officers the most. And for me, that was music. Another thing that is very important in this essay is that you should make sure that it is in your own voice and that you aren't trying too hard or using too many sophisticated words in an attempt to impress the admission officers. It is more important that this is in your own voice, even if it's some unorthodox style. Onto my own essay. So for me, when I was thinking about what I wanted to write for this essay, like I said before, I wanted it to be something that embodies who I am. And for me in high school, what I did a lot of was music. However, with music, there wasn't one single thing that I could focus on. I started many music groups. I led the high school marching band. I attended honor bands and saxophone workshops, and I competed in solo competitions. So I really had a bit of trouble trying to figure out how to bring all this into one singular essay. If you look a bit more online, you can see that other high school seniors applying to college write about one specific moment or one specific extracurricular that they participate in, or they might use like an extended metaphor. For me, however, none of these options seem to fit what I wanted to write, so I came up with my own essay style. Essentially, how my essay works is I begin by introducing myself as a naive freshman who just enters music and is just beginning to discover what music really is at my high school. And throughout the essay, I develop and introduce each individual aspect of music that I fell in love with, that I developed and worked on, and how I see myself learning from this and using this knowledge in the future. Alright, now let's begin reading my essay and analyzing it. Let me start from the beginning. I discovered my life in room M101. To most of the other 1,300 students at my school, this uncharted territory is simply an anonymous gray building at the far corner of our campus. To me, however, room M101 is a home, a hideout, a magical sanctuary. It's where I fell in love. So this is the opener of my essay, and it's important to have an opener that hooks the reader and grabs their attention and makes them want to keep reading. My very first sentence is separated by itself. It reads, I discovered my life in room M101. Immediately, I'm adding of intrigue into my essay. The reader immediately thinks, what is room M101? How did this room M101 become my life? And then as I develop in the essay, the reader slowly understands and gets what I'm talking about, and I don't directly tell them, oh, room M101 is my school's music building. Instead, I kind of infer it in the next paragraph. In the next paragraph, I show how room M101 is very special, especially to me in my school of 1,300 students. And something I want to point out here is that don't be afraid of using very specific numbers or numbers in general. Note that I literally say 1,300 students. This is good because it actually brings context to what you're talking about, shows the reader out exactly how big of an achievement or what's the scope of what you're talking about. So in here, I'm basically saying that out of 1,300 students, I'm one of the very few who really know about M101 and spend most of my time here, while everybody else is doing things on the other sides of campus. Also notice I end my second paragraph with another hook. I'd say it's where I fell in love, further pushing this idea that room M101 is so important to me. It's literally my life and it's where I fell in love. Two very important things of humanity. Now I'll be moving on. I was 13 when I walked in the first time. Shy and tentative back then, and clutching my saxophone case in one hand. Alone in a small room, I unlatched the case and opened up my whole life. So as you can see, I'm further developing what my life is and how this room or music influences this. And here's where I develop and introduce myself as a naive freshman. And something I want to point out in this paragraph is my word choice, especially in the word clutching. By using the word clutching, it has a connotation that I'm kind of nervous or kind of anxious, and this kind of furthers the image I'm trying to show of a naive or shy Anthony back then. For example, if I were to use a different word such as holding or just bringing my saxophone case, it really lessens the effect that I'm trying to show. And thus, word choice is very important, and this is something that you can work on when you're revising your essays. Just pay attention to each individual word and think of a word that might sound better or fit better into the context of your sentence, of your essay. that might bring more emotional impact into your essay. Moving on. Since then, every single school day, every second of free time has been spent in M101. Just me, my saxophone, and my music, my fingers flowing up and down the keys, my embouchure firm around the mouthpiece as my tongue flutters in articulating bursts, music filling the room. So something I want to point out in this paragraph is notice my repetition. I'm trying to really emphasize how important music to me and exactly how much time I spend in room M101 working on this craft. I say every single school day, every second of free time has been spent in M101. And then I say just me, my saxophone, my music, my fingers. I'm dialing in on the very specific details. And I'm trying to bring the reader into my shoes and into my experience of going to room M101 every day. And each day, surrounding myself with my own music, playing my own music, each part of my body engaged, my fingers, my embouchure, my tongue. Something I want to show through this paragraph is don't be afraid to be very descriptive and paint a very vivid picture in your reader's mind. Because keep in mind, they're reading many essays, and they have probably read many music essays. But I feel like something that makes mine different is how in tune I am with my experiences and how I'm able to draw the reader in and experience my experiences with me. Moving on. The saxophone is not only my closest confidant, but also my greatest teacher. For National History Day, I wandered the casual streets, moody clubs, and elegant halls of jazz's rich history and met Benny Goodman, a white jazz clarinetist whose then radical, racially integrated quartet broke down the racial barriers of the segregated 1930s. His playing inspired my improvisation, and his conviction inspired me to challenge the norm. From the impossible spontaneity of a jazz solo to the lyrical singing of classical, I found a new confidence in myself and an increased appreciation of what music can be. So here I'm beginning to talk about the different aspects of music that I explored and learned about. So this first one, I focused on this project I did in history class. So I'm talking about how I connected music with history, called National History Day. And in here, I have a sentence that I want to point out. I wandered the casual streets, moody clubs, and elegant halls of jazz's rich history and met Benny Goodman. Now, of course, I can't actually wander the streets or clubs or halls of jazz, and I can't actually meet Benny Goodman, who has died a while ago. This is a metaphor. And again, this is going back to what I talked about concerning imagery and metaphors. It is actually better to show than tell. I want the reader to feel like I am actually exploring jazz and meeting this historical figure. Through this paragraph, I also wanted to show how I explored music, especially with saxophone, since it's both a jazz and a classical instrument, and how from learning more about jazz, I actually increased my confidence and improved myself. Now I want to introduce a structure that I follow when I wrote all my essays, not just my personal statement. I always kept in mind to bring in context with specific numbers and names. I talk about my experience and what I learned from my experience. And finally, I kind of touch on what I hope to do with that experience in the future and how I want to build on it. So for example, in this paragraph, I talked about the context. I had a history project called National History Day. The experience, I wandered the casual streets, moody clubs, and halls of jazzy rich history and studied Benny Goodman. And then what I learned from it and how I hope to grow from it is that I discovered jazz's impossible spontaneity and classical's lyrical singing, and I also found a new confidence in myself. And in the rest of this essay, you can see how in each paragraph I kept that kind of structure in mind in order to build a more vivid and clear picture in the reader's mind. Moving on. The more I learn about my instrument, the more it opens my eyes to possibilities. Noticing the lack of chamber ensembles in the county, I started several saxophone quartets in my school and county. Leading the quartets, I discovered something even more intimate than playing in a band. We moved together, listened to each other, and formed a connection that required no words. This year, I am taking the next step and starting a county-wide saxophone ensemble with over 20 musicians. So in these two paragraphs, I'm touching on another aspect of music that I explored, which was starting saxophone ensembles. And here I'm using parallelism to really paint the image in the reader's mind. And the repetition I'm talking about is like in the end of the first paragraph, we moved together, listening to each other, and formed a connection that required no words. And I really think this parallelism helps to bring my experience into the reader's mind. And again, I'm bringing context by saying that I noticed a lack of chamber ensembles in my county. I'm bringing experience, saying I started several saxophone quartets in my school and county. And I talk about what I learned from it and how I will build on it in the future by saying that I discovered something very intimate and that's very enjoyable, and that in the future I hope to start an even bigger project with a county-wide saxophone ensemble. Keep in mind that the readers are like a blank slate, and you really want to paint an image of who you are in their head, so that requires you to bring in very descriptive context, and then you can develop on what you actually did and what you learned from it. Moving on now. Fellow saxophonists became my close friends and mentors. Playing in honor bands and saxophone workshops were surreal experiences, but the people I met made them special. Professor Chien Kwan Lin at the Eastman Saxophone Workshop this past summer helped me approach my music in a more expressive, meaningful way. Year after year, County Honor Band and All-State Honor Band brought me teachers and friends who stay in my life long after our final performance together. Year after year, I worked for these moments, and our performances brought me to stages I will never forget. So in this paragraph, I really wanted to touch on the personal connections and friends and mentors that I met through music. And I really emphasize the people rather than the performances, especially when I say that it brought me teachers and friends who stay in my life long after our final performance together. And I also use repetition when I say year after year in order to show that this is a consistent trend that I noticed and that I experienced, and all these personal connections stayed with me every single year. Something else I wanted to point out is that you shouldn't be afraid of name dropping. Like in here, I name dropped Professor Chien Kwan Lin at the Eastman Saxophone Workshop. This is actually helpful because it brings authenticity into your essay, and it shows the reader or the admission officer that you truly did what you're talking about and that you know what you're talking about. Moving on. My most emotional performance was with my school saxophone quartet in the enormous Bulldog Stadium for the Sierra Cup Classic competition at CSU Fresno. As we led the band to close our 2019 season, the thousands in the crowd erupted into earth-trembling cheers that shook our souls to the core. We thought of our 3 years together, practicing under the sun, laughing during rush lunch breaks, and cracking jokes on our late-night bus rides home, and held back tears as the 4 of us poured our hearts out for the world to hear. So I said that this is my most emotional performance, and thus I really wanted the reader to feel the emotion that I was feeling. I point out that there were thousands in the crowd, I said that their cheers are earth-trembling, and that it shook our souls to the core. Further, I even use a line break to talk about specific moments of the personal connections I made with these 3 fellow members of my saxophone quartet. Again, notice how I'm name dropping this specific stadium and a specific competition. It gives them a setting, gives them a time, a place, and helps them create a more vivid image and put them in my shoes even better. Moving on. If the Bulldog Stadium was my most exciting performance, my most meaningful took place across the globe in the rural, impoverished village of Yunnan, China. Like stars against the night sky, the eyes of my 14 students glowed as they sang Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World" and performed a choreographed dance accompanied by my soprano saxophone. I realized I had brought New Orleans jazz through California and across the world. Now this paragraph might not make too much sense to you if you don't know what I'm talking about, but this is good because you can keep in mind that the admission officers do have your activities list that they can refer to in order to understand what you're talking about. So for this one, I am referencing a summer camp or like a volunteering opportunity that I attended every summer where I traveled to rural China to teach a class of around 14 students English. And this specific year, I decided to bring my soprano saxophone and actually show them some of the music I play in the States. Moving on. My years of practice paid off this year when I won the American Protégé International Concerto Competition, meaning I will travel across the country to the bright lights and red carpets of Carnegie Hall, the nation's most iconic stage. So here, along with the last 2 paragraphs, I kind of wanted to build an emotional climax, like a climax of achievements in these last 3 paragraphs by showing my most emotional performance, my most meaningful performance, and reaching Carnegie Hall, which is arguably the most prestigious concert hall a musician can reach. And then that is it for how I addressed each aspect of music that I worked on. As you can see, I talked about connecting music with history and learning about jazz, starting numerous saxophone ensembles and saxophone quartets. I talked about the people I met, the mentors and friends that I made, my most emotional performance with my saxophone quartet that I started, my most meaningful performance by bringing music across the world, and also my most highest achievement by reaching Carnegie Hall by winning an international concerto competition. So at this point, I expect the reader to have many emotions built up and see how high I've reached from where I started in room M101 as a freshman. So here's my last paragraph. But when I think about my music, I don't instantly think of the roar of Bulldog Stadium or the dazzling lights of Manhattan. I think instead of M101 and the quiet hours I spent in devotion to something I love. So as you can see, I built up all this emotional tension by talking about everything I did through music, the people I met, the emotional performances, and reaching Carnegie Hall. But at the very end, I bring it all back down and I bring it all back to room M101 where it all began to kind of ground the reader and ground myself and show that the glory and the pride is not why I do music. Instead, it's really just doing something I love and achieving things through what I love. I really wanted to show the admission officers that I truly love music and that music and saxophone is something that made me who I am and brought me everything that I have. Through this essay, I really wanted to show colleges exactly how much music meant to me, from marching band to honor bands to the people I met through music and to the experience of performing for huge crowds. I wanted to convey all of these priceless experiences to the readers. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through Linkstory or my website, and I hope my essay has inspired you to write your own personal statement. Good luck!